I'm Jeffrey Toobin with The New Yorker, here today with Tim Wu, professor at Columbia Law School and author, most recently, of a new book called The Master Switch. And your book is really sort of a history of technology over the last 100 years and industry by industry, how there were controlling companies, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, what I show is each industry you have this cycle. You have some new invention, something very exciting like the radio, telephone, the internet. And there's this period of openness, utopian dreams. It's going to change everything. The industry is very competitive in this period, all kinds of entrepreneurs. And what tends to happen is there arises one sort of mogul or one defining company which takes the industry, consolidates it, centralizes it, and that's where the idea of the master switch comes up. One company tends to close the industry, and then it can remain closed for decades.
At the heart of your book is this idea of the cycle.
Yeah.
That technologies, whether it's radio, movies, telephone, today, the internet, go from chaos to centralization.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
I don't think it's a good thing. I think it has advantages for viewers and consumers, but the real question is whether you really want one or two people or one or two companies in charge of what people see and hear.
Is there something about capitalism? Is there something about the United States that makes this happen? Why does it keep happening?
I think it's a mixture partially of economics. There's economics of scale. Bigger things are sometimes more efficient. And there's also something of a sort of will to power. There are people see an opportunity, there's chaos, and there's a chance to take power. And it's usually a man with incredible ambitions who says, I am going to own this industry. Whether it's David Sarnoff in radio, whether it's Theodore Vail, who took over a phone system, became the AT&T monopoly, whether today it's Eric Schmidt and Steve Jobs, who are sort of dueling to take over information and over the internet. You see these men who just see the opportunity for power.
You know, I have to admit, until I read your book, I'd never heard of Vail. Who was Mr. Vail?
So Mr. Vail was one of the greatest monopolists in American history. He took AT&T, which was kind of a struggling small company, helped them and built it effectively into the great AT&T monopoly, which lasted for 70 years. So he is perhaps, I mean, there's other great monopolists, but in communications, he is the model monopolist.
And is he a hero or a villain?
He's kind of a mixed figure. Because on the one hand, he's devoted to bringing telephones to every American, and he does so over his career. But he also crushes and destroys all of his competitors. He is resolutely a monopolist. He does not believe in competition at all. He believes that every industry should be controlled by single figures who control all the power. And so, you know, you have mixed feelings about a guy like that.
The cycle.
Yeah.
You are a partisan of the chaotic part of the cycle.
Yeah.
Is there any way that the government could extend this period of raucous competition?
I'm a fan of the chaotic side. I think it's more consistent with the American speech tradition and with the American idea that competition is better than monopoly, which actually is a more recent idea than you think. You know, America, even though we talk about this stuff, we tolerate monopolies in so many fields. Is there any way government can handle this? Well, one thing is it can blow up monopolies, which it does every once in a while. And actually, although everyone complains and stuff, the effects are often quite good. There's a lot of chaos.
Example, I mean, would you say that the AT&T breakup in the 80s was by and large a success?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
The AT&T breakup eventually begat the internet. You had essentially an industry that was static, almost completely unmoving.
All the phones were black.
All the phones were black. Actually, they introduced color phones. That was one of the
just at the very end, though.
They introduced the color phones because they wanted to prove, you know, we do offer variety. They had phones for ladies also at some point. Anyway, and out of that you had chaos, but you also had all these internet service providers. You had AOL, dial-up internet.
Well, even before that, you had cheap long distance.
Yeah, cheap long distance.
I remember when I signed up for Sprint for the first time, it was very exciting.
Yeah.
You had
So
to put in a code.
AT&T breakup was unquestionably, and at the time I was like, why do you blow up this company? It was perfectly fine. Occasionally you got to blow stuff up if our system is to work. Something else the government can do is to try to create rules that prevent companies from becoming too integrated, particularly vertical integration, which means they own both content and distribution. Because when they own content and distribution, there's always something of a conflict of interest.
From chaotic competition to behemoth controlling everything. Where are we today in that cycle in terms of the internet?
Well, these cycles tend to go about 30 years. And we are, if you think of the internet becoming a mass phenomenon in the mid-1990s, we're kind of getting towards the period of consolidation. Now, if you look at all the major industries, you notice there's just one major internet markets. You don't see hundreds of companies anymore. Where do you get your internet service from? Well, you have your cable company or your phone company. Where do you go for your search engine? Basically, you got Google. Where are you going for social networking? Basically, it's Facebook. We've seen a re-emergence of monopolists or one or two companies in almost every field. And so we're getting to that period. And if history repeats itself, we should see 1, 2, or 3 companies try and take over everything.
One phrase you personally are very identified with is net neutrality. You're often called the originator of the phrase net neutrality. First of all, what does it mean?
Net neutrality is the principle that the internet should treat all content the same. So it doesn't matter where an email comes from the Pope or it comes from a homeless man. The packets are carried as if blindly. All content is treated equally. That's the idea of net neutrality.
What's the history of it in terms of whether it exists in the real world?
Okay, well, it's really interesting where it came from, because it wasn't like someone sat down and said we should make the internet this egalitarian sort of project. It's more the internet was created by research scientists. They were trying to hook up a bunch of networks that didn't agree on much. And so they had to create some kind of protocol everyone could agree to. So I said, well, what can you agree? Everyone gets treated the same. You try to take everyone's traffic and treat it the same. It's called best effort routing. That's the origins of equal treatment on the internet. Now, what's weird is I thought about it as a technical solution to a difficult problem, but it had profound cultural, social effects.
What
ultimately.
Were they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see now that unknown people can become famous on YouTube, blogs, sometimes out traffic, major media sites, all because everything's being treated equally. It all comes from these old days where everyone on the internet said, look, this is the internet, it's a network we all connect to, we're going to treat each other equally. And what it created is this strange equality among speakers, which is unprecedented in media history.
Google has decided to digitize every book ever printed, give everyone in the world access to all the great libraries of the world.
Yeah.
Is that a bad thing?
No, it's a great thing. It's exactly like what AT&T did in the 1910s. They said, we're going to wire all of America. That's why we need a monopoly. Google's saying the same thing. We're putting billions of dollars in this project. It's going to be great for everyone.
Are they
Trust
wrong?
us. No, they're not. But you do have to be careful with these people.
Well, what's
it's
the
a lot
risk?
like
What's the risk?
Well, the risk with AT&T is they were great for the first 10, 20 years, and then they turned into a monopoly that stifled innovation, kept prices high for another 50 years. So you get there's this golden phase with these defining moguls, with these monopolists, right at the beginning where they enjoy the benefits of centralization and they use their enormous power for the public good. The problem is once they get there, they don't want to leave. They're exactly like with benevolent dictators in other countries. They're usually great at the beginning, but then they never want to leave. And then so they spend all their efforts trying to protect themselves against being unseated. You already see some of this with Google.
How so?
Google is threatened by Apple in the wireless market. So they are spending almost as much money as you might want to try and control wireless. A market which was never naturally theirs. I'm talking about smartphones.
Right.
They're spending as much money as there is on Android and making as many partnerships as possible for a market that was never clearly a natural market for them, but it's defensive.
What is the nature of the competition today between Google and Apple? What are they fighting about?
They're fighting to control, you could say they're fighting to control the master switch. They're fighting for the platform. This is not old-style, better mousetrap type competition or price guy, I'm outpricing you. This is, we want to control the nature of competition itself.
And how are they doing that?
Well, they're trying to push or move the world towards a more open or a more closed environment where they assume they will have the advantage.
And what do you mean by a closed
What
world?
I mean by that is a world where it resembles the iPhone. Everything you get or resembles iTunes. Everything you get is because Apple has chosen it or Apple has accepted it as being good. So everything goes through Apple. And they bring you the best stuff. You know, they have great deals with Hollywood, with New York publishers. They're friends with old media. Google envisions a world where, you know, everything's up for grabs, where you can get anything. Amateurs provide a lot of the content. You have YouTube and so on. YouTube is a model for what they think the media future looks like. And they think in that environment they will win. One thing I say in the book, and this may be a little ridiculous, but if you can imagine a battle between two predators, you know, like a lion and a polar bear, what determines the battle is whether you're talking about snow or savanna. So instead of trying to really fight with each other, they're trying to convert the world into the environment where they do best. And Google knows it wins in the open world. Apple knows it wins in the closed world. So they're furiously doing what they can to make as much of the world as possible their home environment.
When you came up with the phrase net neutrality, you were really talking about the world where it was just the internet.
Yeah.
Net neutrality, to some people, may be different whether you're talking about the internet or the app world of Apple.
The real fight right now is what is the wireless app device world going to look like? That is it going to be closed or open? Is it going to be net neutral, or is it going to be more like cable television or something like that? Is it going to be Apple or Google in rough shorthand?
But isn't it recently the case that Google has sided with Verizon in a proposal that some people think is opposed to the idea of net neutrality?
It's quite complicated. It's definitely true that Google, in pursuit of success in this area, has been willing to make deals that 5 years ago everyone would have thought were scandalous.
And what kind of deals are those?
Google, see, this is what's really interesting, is Google sees itself as the prophet of openness. But the strange thing is it's willing to make deals that may be closed deals to get there.
For example?
For example, Verizon. If you talk to Eric Schmidt believes that he is converting Verizon to the side of openness. A lot of other people think that Google is getting converted by Verizon. So there's a real ambiguity of what's going on here. It's a little like when America goes to Iraq to install, you know, democracy, and then along the way we're supposed to be installing human rights, and then we get involved in all kinds of funny business that. The question is what you sacrifice.
Who's converting who?
Who's converting who? It's the classic question. So when we go to the middle of America, goes to the Middle East to try and convert the Middle East to, you know, democracy and openness. Sometimes we end up becoming them along the way. So there's the exact same problem with Google, but they're pretty sure about their mission.
And what is the deal, the controversial deal between Google and Verizon?
Well, you know, no one knows the full extent.
Really?
No one knows.
Because it hasn't started yet?
I mean, there's the publicly announced portion of it.
Well, which is what?
Oh, they say, this is what we think net neutrality should be. And here's the crucial thing about it, is they agree that net neutrality over the wires should be completely full implemented net neutrality.
Over the wires?
Over the wires mean over broadband ISP, the thing you plug into in your home.
Right.
But for these new apps, wireless devices, smartphones, they say, let's just hold on and see what happens.
What do you think?
I think the same principle should apply to apps and devices.
How would that work, to have the same principles when one is free and anybody who's on the web can get to any website, and the other, you know, Apple says we are going to offer you the following 10 or 1,000 apps, and that's it. How can both of those markets be treated the same way by government?
There's a translation of the principles in some ways. One thing is you shouldn't, you know, they should watch crippling of phones. It's typical for AT&T to cripple features that it thinks might threaten.
What do you mean by cripple?
So they'll cripple, in the old days AT&T used to cripple Wi-Fi on phones, because then you might be able to make Skype calls. A lot of phones companies tried to block Skype, period, from offering apps. So you have to have some scrutiny of anti-competitive app decisions. You know, people try to block Skype. They try to block all kinds of companies out of the App Store because they don't like them.
Can you get Skype on a phone that gets the internet?
You can, sometimes.
Really?
Sometimes, yeah. Save you a lot of money.
I would think, yeah.
Save you a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have phones, frankly, that were close to free. You could have, you know, they could pick up Wi-Fi or cheap, or relatively cheap things, have no phone plan, and just do all your calls on Skype. You could have these phones. The industry doesn't want them because there's more than $100 billion out there, but you could have much cheaper phones.
Well, but sure, the industry doesn't want them, but how are you going to have a phone industry if everybody's Skyping? and not paying them any money.
30 years ago, people said this about AT&T. They said, we can't possibly let people buy their own phones. That will destroy everything that's great about American communications. The whole idea of people plugging their own phones seemed like an outrageous, radical idea, and everyone said that's going to be the end of AT&T, we won't have good phone service. Turned out to be the opposite. So I think when consumers, entrepreneurs are free to buy their own phones, hook them up to any network, we'll actually have a better world, not a worse world.
What's the big technology communications issue of 2020?
It is definitely apps, devices, wireless phones, devices, iPads. What are the rules for them?
And what about those rules will be most controversial?
Well, the question is whether or not you can have basically the reappearance of the walled garden. The question of whether you can have, whether that environment will be controlled by the carriers and a few big companies, or whether it actually be entrepreneurial. You know, the internet in the 90s, in the 2000s was new companies showing up all the time, entrepreneurship, innovation, very open. The question in the 2010s is whether we're just going to have 4 or 5 huge entities, i.e., you know, Google, Verizon, Apple, AT&T, maybe Comcast and some other partner, scrambling for this, taking it all over, and producing a lasting monopoly.
What's after that?
Oh, this is really interesting. I think at some point people are going to get fed up with information channels themselves being controlled by so few people and try and break open that market. And, and try and, you know, for example, set up mom and pop wireless service providers. Everyone who's tried to do that has died for years and years and years. But maybe one day this will come. And that would blow everything open again in completely different ways. If you had incredibly high-speed wireless networks that were much cheaper than what you have today. Another idea.
Do you think the technology could exist to support that?
Sure, sure. It's a government licensing issue, spectrum reform. The other big thing that could happen is maybe there's a successor to the internet itself.
Meaning?
We've seen a successor to the web. You know, the web is just an app. That is some protocol, some network that operates fundamentally different than the internet itself and succeeds the internet itself.
And what would such a network do that the internet couldn't do? Foot massages?
If I knew that, I might not be a law professor. It's hard to know. Maybe just vastly higher quality, vastly higher speeds, something. No one knows. No one knows. But the internet's an old protocol.
You think of the internet as an old protocol by now?
Oh yeah.
It's
20,
25 years old by now?
No, it was written early 1970s.
Was it really?
Yeah. You know, yeah. It's early 70s. So yeah, it's aged. Most engineers think it could. Yeah.
It could. I'm sorry.
Most engineers think it could be improved vastly, but everyone would have to agree on it. But one day, like everything, the internet itself will fall.
Tim, thank you. I've been talking with Tim Wu, professor at Columbia Law School and author of the new book, The Master Switch. I'm Jeffrey Toobin for The New Yorker.